Welcome to the Future of Structures podcast, where we talk to the experts who are helping to evolve our buildings to meet the challenges of tomorrow. And here is our host, Adam Jones.
Welcome everyone to the first episode of the Future Buildings podcast. I'm very happy and excited to get stuck into this podcast because right now we are living in an incredible time. There are so many moving parts in many industries, and what we call a structure today is likely to be completely different in the future. We have many moving parts, including exponential technology. There's limits to the global capacity, and there are new engineering challenges to deal with the increasing urban density. So in the past, operational energy emissions have had a huge impact on structures. So where we are now, and in our podcast, what we're going to cover a lot on is focusing on the new materials for the future and focusing on not just operational energy, but also the embodied emissions of buildings. So some examples of that might be what we're going to cover is evolutionary structural design. And using this, you might intuitively, a human might design a building a certain way, but when you get a computer to do it, it starts to look completely different. And Arup have already done a lot of work in this area. Also 3D printed beams. So when you print a beam, traditionally when we manufacture our products, we are quite inefficient because we produce everything with economies of scale of just the same beam. But now we can print specific and purposeful beams for the certain function and in a building. And if this technology takes off, this can change the way we do things. Also, on the same topic, 3D printed buildings, and in addition, like completely new materials. So in the past, we've been so lazy as I'm a structural engineer myself with what we do with steel. So right now, the global consumption of steel is 200 kilograms for every single person every single year. So we are virtually unaware of our metal consumption, and especially as engineers, we are also responsible for a lot of the impacts on the world at the moment, but with that is the greatest opportunities. And I think if Australia and the rest of the world are serious about getting to zero emissions by 2050, there are going to be huge changes with how we design things, and I don't think steel will be a bigger part in the future as it has been in the past. So alternative materials such as basalt reinforcement and geopolymer cement, or designing completely away from traditional with buildings such as CLT buildings, which have already started to pop up everywhere. We saw a huge building, I think it was 20 stories in Canada, of CLT, a hybrid with a concrete core. And here just in Melbourne, which is near me, what I've been working on, there is a 10-story CLT building going up on top of a 7-story office building. So that just opens up a whole new can of worms, because traditionally apartment buildings have less load than offices. So there might be things like offices changing to apartment buildings and being refitted for the new apartment loading. And then that leaves us the capacity in all the structural columns and materials to be able to take on extra loads. So I know I've briefly covered a lot of things in this introduction, but it is so exciting, and we're going to get a lot of special guests on the podcast and experts in these areas. So if you want to be on top of the industry and where it's going, then stay tuned for this podcast.